Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, August 1st. Happy August. How are you? August 1st, 2017. What shall we talk about? Of course, we were not on the air live yesterday, although I think that the big news of the day didn't happen until after we were off the air anyway, so I don't think we lost any ground there. Where do you want to start? Some of the things that happened over the weekend that we didn't manage to discuss the other day would be one place. Of course, have we made mention of the dismissal of Reince Priebus on the air at any point, whether live or in pre-recorded show? I don't think so. So maybe we ought to take note of that at some point. That would probably be worth doing. He's gone. Of course, we could talk endlessly about the circumstances under which he was dismissed, which is, I understand things, on returning from the president's trip to make his maniacal speech about MS-13 gang members and lead us astray once again with his ridiculous rhetoric, that upon return, I feel like this must have happened during time that we were on the air, but did he basically, fire Reince Priebus while still on the plane? They flew back together on Air Force One. He said, "Why don't you get off and get in the car? I'll be right behind you." And he tweets, "You're fired," basically, and announces the hiring of General Kelly. We must have made some mention of this, I think, because it happened, I think, before the close of the week last week. And I recall that we may have discussed a little bit about, so what are we going to do about a Department of Homeland Security between now and whenever they decide to finally get around to getting us a secretary, and who knows how long that's going to take. The nominations process being, of course, upside down and inside out, since Trump has been unable to nominate anybody competent to any of these jobs, and Democrats not particularly interested in making the process move any faster. We did note for our broadcast yesterday, our pre-taped show, which I was glad to be able to bring you, that some senators, or at least Ron Johnson, who, as it happens, qualifies more or less as a senator, saying that he'd like to see the nominations process speeded up, which I guess would be helpful considering how far behind they've fallen here. But definitely some strange things going on. What else have we got? I mean, Anthony Scaramucci out, and we didn't have the opportunity to discuss that yesterday, and I think it probably happened post-show, or at least I found out about it post-show, which is more or less the same thing. Even if I hadn't recorded the show live, that's I think the news on most people's lips. But then, of course, it didn't last very long. You can't hang your hat on one White House crisis for very long before another one crops up. But we should give this one its due. Let's see. I don't know how much detail we have about the Scaramucci firing, other than lots of people laughing at it. I mean, it was kind of humorous. It was also, there was a tragic element to it, if you care about Anthony Scaramucci, and all evidence suggests that you should not. But the guy did anticipate a high-ranking job in the Trump administration, but then the Trump administration never materialized, so that was a problem. And gosh, I mean, there's so much to it. He sold his business. He's a hedge fund or something? Skybridge Capital. I fell off the Skybridge. Anyway, and he decided to sell it under strange circumstances, by the way, and had he hung around, it might likely have become an issue. But as I understand it, he was about to finalize a sale. But there was still some paperwork to work out because he was selling it to a Chinese company, and I guess it entailed some questions for some bureaucracy somewhere about whether or not this was being done properly and about whether or not the sale price, this got raised at the very end on his way out the door, and it was, at least briefly alleged that Reince Priebus, in fighting back against the Scaramucci power play that lasted all of a day, that Reince was the one possibly turning people on to the notion that the sale had been agreed upon for a greater, let's say greater than what the market might otherwise demand, price, with the understanding that the Chinese buyers would be given some preferential access, perhaps, to the president by Scaramucci in return. That was an interesting allegation. I don't know if we'll ever get to examine that one because he was out so quickly, and what an unceremonious firing it was. Let's see, there were also various reports that he was escorted from the premises, which was kind of interesting and weird, and perhaps, I don't know whether it was, uncalled for or what, but I don't know. It certainly made, it put an exclamation point on that particular episode. Anyway, I mean, that ended up getting overshadowed by evening time with the news. I mean, it's news. It was in the newspaper, so you know it's news when it's in the newspaper. Although I felt like we knew this already, but I guess it's now been established. I think we had concluded that this was the case. Now there's reporting establishing that it is the case that the statement issued by, and I guess on behalf of, but issued by Donald Trump Jr. with respect to, and remember that he issued several, and they were all misleading right from the beginning, and they revised it a couple of times, and then misled us in different ways with subsequent statements. But even the final statement that Don Jr. supposedly was issuing with respect to his June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower with the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya and a variety, a rotating and varied cast of Russians and campaign aides at the time. That statement, I guess the initial news we heard was that it had emanated somehow from the White House, and specifically from Air Force One and the White House staff on their return trip from the G20 meetings. And now I guess it's established, according to the Washington Post and others, that the statement was dictated to the staff to issue, dictated by the president, the quote-unquote president himself, Donald Trump. Which is amazing, given how much trouble it caused, and B, how much trouble it caused Don Jr. I mean, it really put him in legal jeopardy, and his father did that to him. I don't know if his father was smart enough, we'd say, my gosh, that's a cold and calculating move to throw your son under the bus that way. But I think he just accidentally threw his son under the bus. He thought that statement was going to clear things up because he's a moron. And he thought that everybody would buy that because all his life people have bought whatever he said and walked away. And now people are skeptical of him, and he's trying to pretend he's the president. And people look more carefully at these things, and it's not working anymore. We'll read about that. Also, by the way, that also means that there should be, by all rights, but who knows whether it's ever going to come about, some reckoning with respect to how certain of the president's proxies and spokespeople are going to be received in the future on Sunday talk television, because one of the president's battery of lawyers, Jay Sekulow, the one who likes to make television appearances the most often, and who, by the way, is a thieving jackass and steals money from charities in order to personally enrich himself and his family. He was the last one to appear on behalf of the president, the last of the battery of lawyers to appear in giving the excuses about the June 2016 meeting in Trump Tower. And as I recall, not from watching the show, of course, but from reading the wrap-ups of the show provided by all of the rest of you and our larger media community, he was on the air with Chuck Todd on Meet the Press and a few other of the Sunday shows eventually, I think a few weeks after appearing on Meet the Press, and he just flatly denied twice to Chuck Todd's face, or perhaps his image on a monitor, or what, I don't know how the whole thing was set up, but everybody's talking about that now. He just flat lied about Donald Trump's involvement in the crafting of and issuance of Donald Trump Jr.'s statement here. We had nothing to do with it. I think he may have later conceded that he may have reviewed it after the fact. It's going to be really interesting to watch, one, whether he gets on any television shows again, and I'm sure he will. And two, whether or not anybody says to him at some point, why am I supposed to believe what you said? You're caught dead to rights, lying to our faces twice. How do I, should I just assume that you just lied right now? Except that sounds oddly like something we'll never get a chance to see. Although it will be fun and entertaining when we do, and I guess it'll help us answer, what do these people have to do in order to get called out as liars on these shows? Although I'm pretty sure that the hosts of these shows would say, what are you talking about? I call them out as liars all the time. Why I'm on record as, all right, well, softer language than I might have been looking for, I guess. It may have slipped my notice. Okay. I guess we should take a look at the actual reporting on this stuff and try and catch up on some of the other stories we'll share here. It is Tuesday, of course, so we are back on the air in between live appearances from Greg Dworkin. We expect that we'll be able to get him and Joan McCarter back on the air tomorrow. Although who knows what could happen in Congress and in the Senate in particular. We tried to catch you up on what was happening with respect to the still sort of, not if not alive, then certainly undead zombie Trump care, zombie treason care, and explain why it is that we can't yet declare this thing dead and gone forever. We'll see what other stories we have to round up here. There's a couple other things burning up the wires, but let's take a quick look over at Aaron Blake's writing at Washington Post about this, in particular about Jay Sekulow and how he handled this issue about the Don Trump Jr. statement. The headline, which runs under that Fix column, the Fix, previously, the bailiwick, I guess we could say, of Chris Cillizza. Now, I don't know, is Aaron Blake the primary writer there these days? Greg would know better than me. Trump's lawyer repeatedly denied Trump was involved in Trump Jr.'s statement, but he was. Well, that's pretty plain. The column here begins with an embedded tweet with containing the video of the exchange between Chuck Todd and Jay Sekulow, and they're not face to face. I now have the answer to that. Chuck was in Washington D.C., Jay in Nashville, Tennessee. That center, that nerve center of national news. Although they have a studio there and they have the little Meet the Press thing behind them. So I don't know if he is Sekulow from Nashville or the Nashville area. Anyway, when you're in those situations, very often they don't always have a monitor for you to watch where you can see the host's reaction. That's not been the case when I've been in shows like that, but maybe for Jay Sekulow and the heavy hitters, the really big liars out there who have power suits and everything, they set up such monitors. But anyway, the video was grabbed and embedded in a tweet from Judd Legum, who just quotes Jay Sekulow here. I do want to be clear, the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement. I'd be interested to see whether he tries to weasel his way out of that. That's right, he wasn't involved in the drafting of the statement. He was involved in the dictation of the statement. Should be interesting. President Trump's personal lawyer, the column today begins, Jay Sekulow, has some explaining to do. The Washington Post reported Monday night that the president himself was responsible for the drafting of Donald Trump Jr.'s misleading statement after the New York Times revealed that the younger Trump had arranged a meeting with a Russian lawyer in June of 2016. Sources say White House advisors decided to be transparent about the meeting, but the president changed the game plan at the last minute to misleadingly suggest that the meeting was about adoption. That's the most interesting part for me, of course, because we did note the other day when it was revealed. Again, we're always finding these things out by press revelation, which, points, of course, to the fact that the press is doing at least in part, the press is doing a fantastic job making sure these stories reach us. But anyway, we found out some time ago that Trump had that second previously undisclosed and I think entirely unsupervised meeting with Vladimir Putin during the G20, during the dinner, when he left his assigned place with the Japanese Prime Minister and First Lady and hand signaled to Putin that they ought to you, me, fist pump, unga bunga, let's go. And they sat down for a meeting, and apparently that meeting too was about Russian adoption, which is so weird. And we remarked the other day, being prompted by some other observers on Twitter, that it was odd that both that meeting and the June 2016 meeting turned out to both be about Russian adoption. And I'm sure it never occurred to Trump, either Trump really, that it would look unusual when it was laid out on a timeline, because of course they don't do things like that. Why, just the other day, there was a mention of Russian adoption, and now today there's another mention of Russian adoption, and so it all stands to reason. It all makes sense. Why, it's on everyone's mind, Russian adoption. Of course, if you plot it out chronologically, what we're saying here is there was this intense interest by the Russians in Russian adoptions in June of 2016, and then no one heard anything about Russian adoption ever again until a year later when Vladimir Putin brings it up, because it's such a huge and important issue. Vladimir Putin brings it up in this secret, unmonitored meeting, unscheduled and unmonitored meeting at the G20. Of course, now in hindsight that we find out that it was Donald Trump himself who dictated the contents of his son's supposed statement, I don't know whether that, I don't know what we're supposed to conclude from this. If, for some reason, I don't know why Donald Trump would have made up the Russian adoption issue. I don't know if he's smart enough to have pulled that out of thin air. It might be the case that, it may actually turn out to be the case that legitimately Veselnitskaya used that as cover in June of 2016, although I'm beginning to doubt it. And Vladimir Putin also tried to use it as cover for an entree into discussions of lifting sanctions at the G20. But it is more likely, I think, that it came up as cover in the G20 context, since Putin, I think it's one possible explanation is that Putin brings it up just as a soft way of entering a sanctions discussion. It registers for whatever reason, it's not understood as code. It's just like, oh, the man said the word adoption. It registers at that level in Donald Trump's brain, or what's left of it. And then when he comes to, I don't know whether he ever comes to understand it as code or not, but he, on the way home, hears, oh my gosh, we've got this problem with Don Jr. and this meeting. What can we say the meeting was about? Since obviously the meeting was about Russian collusion and getting dirt on Hillary Clinton, and we don't want to say that because I think we're being investigated for that. So what else can we come up with? And everybody was looking around, and I guess the story says that the staff wanted to be transparent about it, and he changed the game plan, and then at the last minute misleadingly suggested that the meeting was about adoption because he had just heard the word adoption mentioned to him by Putin. not thinking that eventually the rest of us would come around to the realization that, hey, we've never heard of this adoption issue before, and we certainly didn't hear anything about it at any point between June of 2016 and now. It's all just coming out all at once. But I guess the temporal displacement here was enough to keep things quiet for a little while. But I think it'll probably slowly dawn on people that, the two mentions of adoption actually come at pretty much exactly the same time and from the same source, as it turns out. That is kind of weird. I wonder if there's any sort of connection there that might lead us to conclude that, I don't know, Donald Trump is full of it and lying to us and obstructing justice. Anyway, we left off in Blake's article here. Sources say the White House advisors had decided to be transparent about the meeting, but the president changed the game plan at the last minute to misleadingly suggest that the meeting was about adoption. I'm kind of interested in the linked article there. How far back are we going? That's the July 13th factcheck.org piece about the evolution of Donald Trump Jr.'s, supposedly Jr.'s, evolving statements, as they put it. All right. The full truth soon came out that the meeting was arranged to discuss compromising information, supposedly from the Russian government, about Hillary Clinton. I guess the only hesitation I have, by the way, with regard to the timeline, is this. How do I put this? All the information we ended up getting about Natalia Veselnitskaya was that she was actually very heavily involved in organizing at least the front groups, whose front was that they were attempting to negotiate the lifting of sanctions using the cover of the adoption story. And she has a we were handed anyway. And I mean, I guess we ought to take note of that. We were sort of handed this dossier of sorts through the media on Veselnitskaya. I mean, none of us have done any independent investigation of what Veselnitskaya's true background is. We have information we were handed via the media that says she was pretty heavily involved, at least in the story of Russian adoption, whether it was cover or not. I guess we can't quite tell just yet, and we have our guesses. But, she was pretty strongly tied to that by the media reports we got. And it would almost run counter to the narrative that we had been handed to say that, to conclude now that adoption never entered into the discussion that any Trump was having with any Russian until the G20 meeting, and then it was retroactively grafted onto the June 2016 meeting. It's difficult to believe that if we are also supposed to believe the narrative we got on Veselnitskaya's background and what she was really involved in, or the cover story she was using at the time to explain the work she was trying to do. So that's kind of strange too. That does throw a wrinkle in things. Let's see. The full truth soon came out about the meeting being arranged to discuss compromising information, supposedly from the Russian government, about Hillary Clinton. The problem for Sekulow, he denied at least twice, pretty unequivocally, that the president played any role in the drafting of the statement. Here's what Sekulow said on NBC's Meet the Press on July 16th. Emphasis added here, I guess, by the crew at The Fix. Chuck Todd saying, "You were very careful to say the president didn't draft the statement. That isn't what I asked." Now, that should have been what you asked, because he did draft the statement. Although right there off the bat, that's why this is being offered up. You were careful to say the president didn't draft the statement. He did, but Chuck Todd doesn't know that yet. That isn't what I asked. Did the president get a heads up on the statement? Did he sign off on the statement? Was he asked to read the statement before it was given to the New York Times on Air Force One? Chuck Todd at this point believing the story that the president had real distance between himself and the statement. Sekulow says, no, I mean, I can't say whether the president was told the statement was going to be coming from his son on that. I didn't have that conversation. And let me say this, but I do want to be clear that the president was not involved in the drafting of the statement and did not issue the statement. It came from Donald Trump Jr., so that's what I can tell you because that's what we know. And Donald Trump Jr. has said the same thing, that it was, in fact, from him, and I believe it was his lawyer, was in consultation. I am sure his lawyer was in consultation. Well, I doubt that he was, because of course he didn't have anything to do with the statement. It came from Dad. And here's Sekulow again, by the way, on ABC's Good Morning America 4 days prior, on July 12th. George Stephanopoulos, this time the questioner. That does raise another set of questions, says George, because the New York Times is reporting this morning the president signed off on the initial statement on Saturday, on the initial statement from Don Jr. on Saturday. How many times is he going to say that? That's live television for you. But didn't mention the emails. Didn't really go into any great detail on the meeting. In fact, was misleading about the meeting. So the president signed off on that statement. Does he feel he was misled by his son and by Jared Kushner if indeed they didn't tell him about these emails that they both received? Can I just pause for a second here? I mean, it's easy to see in hindsight, of course, but and maybe we would have made the same mistake if we were doing the questioning on these shows. I don't know, but look at the incredible deference they still give to the president. The basic assumption is still that this is a normal person we're dealing with and a normal presidency that we're dealing with. That, of course, the president didn't dictate this statement from some other person. That would be bananas. You'd have to be absolutely effing crazy to do something that stupid. Right? Of course. So we'll naturally give the president the benefit of the doubt. There's not even any doubt. Really, all we want to know is, did he know about what was going to be in that statement? Does he, and if so, does he feel like he was misled by his son? And the real question, as it turns out, is, what does his son feel about? Does his son feel like he was misled by his father into issuing this statement and having it be discovered so quickly that he had, that the son whose statement it was actually had nothing to do with the statement? That's pretty amazing. Wow. But, they're in the business of giving deference to presidents because no normal person or president would ever put themselves in that position. Of course they would have somebody else handling it. I'm not going to dictate. You know what I want in this. You can go ahead and do it. There's certainly plenty of that going on. But don't bring it to me to dictate it. I can't do that. I can't be handling that stuff. Talk to my son, get together with him, and hammer out a statement. Should I show it to you after? And some presidents will say, yeah, I demand to see it, of course, but deny that I ever touched it when the time comes. And some others may say, no. Look, I got to trust you, but this thing can't be in my hands. I don't want to have to be denying that I looked at this thing if I did. So just handle it, please. This is not supposed to be in the president's hands. And this guy's paws are all over it. And George Stephanopoulos and Chuck Todd both, and I don't know. I guess under normal circumstances, again, like we said all day yesterday, this is not normal. You have to remind yourself. But normally you wouldn't necessarily blame them for taking that tack. But, I mean, how many warning signs do you need? That, trust me, if something sounds too stupid for anyone to believe that the president actually handled this thing himself, chances are this president handled that thing himself. He did it. We know this. But it's interesting to watch Stephanopoulos and Chuck Todd both having to go through the exercise of beginning by assuming that there's no way the president could possibly have gotten his hands dirty on this thing. So I hope it changes their minds about how to approach reporting on this guy, though I have my doubts. It seems like a pretty hard habit to break. I mean, Even these interviews are 6 months into his presidency, and they haven't got the hang of this guy. Anyway, so here's George Stephanopoulos on July 12th. Anything that starts with the G sound, basically G, J, whatever. I'm just going to make George from now on. July 12th, saying to Sekulow, so the president signed off on the statement, does he feel he was misled by his son and Jared Kushner, if indeed they didn't tell him about these emails that they both received? Sekulow answers, the president didn't sign off on anything. He was coming back from the G20. The statement that was released on Saturday was released by Donald Trump Jr., and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyers. The president wasn't involved in that. Of course, huge lie. Stephanopoulos says, well, the New York Times says that he was involved in it, and several people on the plane were involved in it as well. So you're disputing? And Sekulow says, that's incorrect. It's correct that he's disputing it. He's saying that the account given in the New York Times is incorrect. So you're disputing the account from the New York Times? Yes. Okay. Several of Sekulow's claims in defense of Trump have come under scrutiny. Aaron Blake, writing the article here, says, I did a whole annotation of his Sunday show appearances last month, but these statements are about as contradictory as it gets when compared to the Post's new report. What's remarkable is that, as Stephanopoulos noted, the New York Times had reported at the time, on July 11th, that the president himself approved the statement. Ultimately, the people said the president signed off on a statement from Donald Trump Jr. for the Times, it wrote, and that would have been trouble enough, of course. But in fact, he wrote the thing. So it's difficult to believe Sekulow didn't have an opportunity to verify that information. Instead, he offered a broad and complete denial, and then 4 days later offered the same broad denial. And I don't know, I don't even know if I care whether he had the opportunity to verify the information or not. He feels empowered to just tell the most advantageous lie that he can think of at the moment. Now, of course, it ends up undoing things later on, but yeah, that's just the mandate that this president gives his lawyers. You don't need to know what actually happened. Just say whatever you think is the most advantageous. So they do. And they just lie blatantly, and it's pretty amazing that that's the case. All right, let's see. What other fun things have we to bring up? Oh, well, let's see. I did see in passing today that Lindsey Graham has sort of casually suggested a nuclear first strike, and to do so very quickly, against North Korea, giving everybody what he claims is his advised military consideration here, that the best military option available is to totally destroy North Korea and North Korea's nuclear capability with our own nuclear strike. So that's out there in many ways. That is to say, it's a theory that's in circulation, and it's pretty out there as well. We'll have to keep an eye on that, I guess. My goodness, what a great curveball to throw into things here. Lindsey Graham also at the center of a few other stories, including the resurrection, I guess, again, of zombie treason care. This time as a block granting program. We did make some mention of that in yesterday's show. And apparently he and a few others have visited the White House to meet about what their plan entails, although that ball has not moved forward much in the wake of some of this other news. By the way, here's another fun piece of news that CNN was reporting yesterday. This is just sort of like, we really need this at this point. CNN story, oh look, it's a Jake Tapper story. That probably means they'll try and autoplay this video any second here. Try and be ready for that. White House officials tricked by email prankster. Isn't that fun? And others now, even right now at the moment, noting on Twitter, Brian Klass writing, I feel like I vaguely remember someone arguing last year that being careless with email security was disqualifying to be in the White House. Here's here's the story. Those wacky pranksters out there. A self-described email prankster in the UK. This is your fault, UK. Fooled a number of White House officials into thinking he was other officials, including an episode where he convinced the White House official tasked with cybersecurity, and that might be important, that he was Jared Kushner and received that official's private email address unsolicited. How interesting. Not Jared Kushner's private email address, but this other person who's supposedly in charge of cybersecurity. Good move. Quoting from the fake email from fake Jared Kushner here, Tom, he says, "We are arranging a bit of a soiree towards the end of August." I wonder if Kushner actually talks that way. Or it may be that Tom, whoever that is, wouldn't really recognize Jared Kushner's style in the first place. But anyway, we're arranging a bit of a soiree towards the end of August. The fake Jared Kushner, on an Outlook account, wrote to the official White House email account of Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert. B-O-S-S-E-R-T. I don't think I know Tom Bossert, but I guess we'll get to know him in the coming days. "It would be great if you could make it. I promise food of at least comparable," and he spells it wrong, "quality to that which we ate in Iraq. Should be a great evening." I guess, I assume that this guy, this prankster, did his homework, and that means that Bossert went with Kushner on his trip to Iraq, which means he's got some, at least passing familiarity with Kushner. Bossert wrote back, "Thanks, Jared. With a promise like that, I can't refuse. Also, if you ever need it, my personal email is," and it is herein redacted. And of course, I just moments ago saw Brian Boyler also reacting similarly to this. Private email? What? I can't believe it. This is, of course, a White House official tasked with cybersecurity using his own private email address in addition to his official one because reasons. And also, it's okay, whereas it was terrible when Hillary Clinton did it because also, probably also reasons. Not even sure if they're the same reasons, but they are reasons, and that's the important thing. So Bossert did not respond to CNN's request for comment about this, by the way. The email prankster said he was surprised Bossert responded, given his expertise. The emails were shared with CNN by the email prankster. And as others also have observed, imagine if this prankster wasn't necessarily just interested in pranking people and making them look stupid. Suppose he was interested in telling White House staffers that he was Jared Kushner announcing some major policy change or policy initiative. How long would it have taken for them to catch on? Would they have caught on? Would they change directions in the end if they did catch on, if they had already spoken out in public about it? You know how they are about admitting they were wrong about things. They might have just carried on with the public policy just the same, just to avoid announcing that they had made a mistake or that they were wrong about something. Anything could happen with these guys. White House officials acknowledged the incidents and said they were taking the matter seriously, whatever that might mean. "We take all cyber-related issues very seriously and are looking into these incidents further," White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders told CNN. Cyber experts consulted by CNN say the incidents are illustrative of how vulnerable Americans, even those in the highest reaches of power, remain to the potential threat of spear phishing, the process through which officials are duped by hackers and expose government computers and systems to various cyber threats. No one in any of these situations clicked any links making them vulnerable, and the prankster appears motivated by mischief, not anything more malignant, so the severity of these White House pranks should not be overstated. I mean, they didn't click on any links probably also because they weren't offered any links to click on because the guy was just trying to prank them, not actually hack them. So the caution with which they were approached ought not to be overstated either. But anyway, back to the article. Spear phishers often begin the process by falsely posing as a friend or associate before asking the victim to take further action. This shows how susceptible government officials are to spear phishing in general Adam Malone, a former cyber specialist and special agent for the FBI, told CNN, "Spear phishing is the most common technique used by hackers to gain access to their victims. This information shines a light on how easy it is for people to build trust with unverified individuals." Former Hillary Clinton campaign chair John Podesta infamously fell victim to such a trap, though the person who preyed on him had more nefarious intentions than mockery. "I try and keep it on the humorous side of things," the email prankster told CNN. "I'm not trying to get the keys to the vault or anything like that." One such exchange appears to have possibly played a role in the tensions between then White House Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci, who resigned from his job earlier yesterday, and since fired White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus. This is interesting. Masquerading as Priebus, the prankster emailed Scaramucci's official account using a mail.com account on Saturday, the day after Priebus's resignation was announced. "I had promised myself I would leave my hands mud-free," wrote the fake Priebus. "But after reading your tweet today, which stated how soon we will learn who in the media has..." Oh my gosh. Even the writing is good. Here's how it actually reads on this page. "After reading your tweet today, which stated how, quote, soon we will learn who in the media who has class and who hasn't, unquote, has pushed me to this." Okay, I think you get what he meant. "That tweet was breathtakingly hypocritical even for you. At no stage have you acted in a way that's even remotely classy. Yet you believe that's the standard by which everyone should behave towards you? General Kelly will do a fine job. I'll even admit he will do a better job than me. But the way in which that transition has come about has been diabolical and hurtful. I don't expect a reply." This is, again, a email from a prankster pretending to be Reince Priebus to Anthony Scaramucci. The very real Scaramucci responded, "You know what you did. We all do, even today. But rest assured, we were prepared. A man, capital M, a man would apologize." Unquote. Very juicy. He doesn't, the hacker, the prankster doesn't actually manage to get a statement out of Scaramucci about what this thing is that he thinks Reince knows he did. But I guess, that's to be expected. If the real Scaramucci thinks the real Reince Priebus knows very well what he did, he wouldn't have to restate it for us. But we came that close to getting a real scoop out of this story. The very real Scaramucci, oh yes, right, a man would apologize. The fake Priebus wrote back, "I can't believe you are questioning my ethics. The so-called mooch who can't even manage his first week in the White House without leaving upset in his wake. I have nothing to apologize for." The actual Scaramucci responded even to this by saying, "Read Shakespeare, particularly Othello. You are right there. My family is fine, by the way, and will thrive. I know what you did. No more replies from me." And he didn't really thrive all that well yesterday, but okay. That's beside the point, believe it or not. In another exchange, Scaramucci was hoodwinked by the same prankster pretending to be ambassador to Russia designate John Huntsman Jr. Boy, this is reason enough to fire Scaramucci, to be honest. "Whose head should roll first?" And by the way, yes, it was the wrong spelling of whose. WHO''S. Who is head should roll first? The bogus Huntsman asked from a Gmail account on Friday. You see what he's doing here? I mean, we keep thinking of hackers as these super beings. All he's doing at this point is writing to Anthony Scaramucci after signing up for an account that under the name of, say, John Huntsman Jr. 1 at gmail.com. "Hey, it's John Huntsman, everybody." Scaramucci. Yeah, okay. Whatever, man. Harvard Law School. Sure. Okay. Anyway, whose head should roll first? The bogus Huntsman asked from a Gmail account on Friday before the Priebus termination had been announced. "Maybe I can help things along somewhat." Both of them, responded the real Scaramucci in an apparent reference to both Priebus and White House senior advisor Steve Bannon, about whom Scaramucci had been quite critical. That's one way of putting it. After a few other nice messages of support from faux Huntsman, Scaramucci wrote, "Are you in Moscow now? If not, please visit." Huntsman himself was also tricked, with the prankster pretending to be Eric Trump this time. Oh, let's see, a sign here from Justice says our signal dropped for about 20 seconds there. Sorry, everybody. If you missed anything, there was, as far as I could tell, in this article, no declaration of nuclear war against North Korea or anyone else. I don't know whether anything happened on the outside, but I think when we left, we were on this email prank story, and we still are, because, we do stories for like 40 minutes here. Anyway, Huntsman himself was also tricked, it turns out, with the prankster pretending to be Eric Trump, the president's son. Is that really, that's all it takes, is just to say eric.trump@gmail.com, and you just start emailing people and say, send me your bank account. Michael Musson comments here that the email pranks used fake-looking addresses and were even flagged as spam and yet fooled people. That's true. You can see in some of the screen captures here that these emails were flagged as possible spam, which, interestingly enough, maybe argues in favor of Jared Kushner's initial excuse for attending the June 2016 meeting with the Russian lawyers in Trump Tower. I didn't read any of it. I didn't read to the bottom. I didn't read what it was about. Even the header of the email said, basically, hey, come to a meeting about getting dirt on Hillary Clinton from the Russian government. I didn't read that. Well, maybe they didn't, because it says P.S. right up at the top, in big letters. This might be spam. Oh, well, it isn't. I'll just give away some secrets. Can you imagine emailing people and saying, hello, it's Eric Trump? Well, you don't have to. It happened to John Huntsman. And remember, he's not yet part of this administration, and he's still regarded as like a smart person in all of this. Huntsman himself was also tricked, with the prankster pretending to be Eric Trump, the president's son. Thanks for the thoughtful note, the ambassador-designate wrote to fake Eric Trump. Russia will be a challenging but no doubt rewarding assignment. The fake Eric Trump responded with this suggestion: maybe we could have Dad sat on a horse, top off, giving the full Putin. He's in better shape than his suits suggest. This gets better and better. It's good prank anyway. Well, that's a good line. Eric Trump, too, was similarly hoodwinked. Boy, this just gets better and better. So Eric, everybody gets a turn at this. You're both a pranker and prankee with this guy. Eric Trump was similarly hoodwinked by the prankster, emailing as his older brother. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh, I sometimes feel like I should read these things in advance just to be prepared for this. Oh, I don't know what to say here at this point. I mean, I think I probably would, if I was this prankster, I would have been like, this is incredible luck. I can't believe I've fooled Scaramucci this many times. This is amazing. Watch, check this out. I just fooled him pretending I was John Huntsman. I wonder if I could fool John Huntsman pretending I'm somebody else. All right, fine. I'll pretend to be Eric Trump. This probably will not work. But okay. Oh my God, it worked. Now, surely at some point the guy says, all right, I really have to test the limits of this. If I can fool Donald Trump Jr. into thinking this fake email is Eric Trump, then I give up. This might be where I start. At this point, honestly, if you haven't already tried this by now, I can't wait. It's going to be about an hour and 10 minutes until I'm done. I'm signing up for Vladimir.Putin@gmail.com. I'm emailing Donald Trump and I'm saying, dude, you told me you were going to give me the launch codes and you're almost out of time. You said it was going to be by today. And if you don't, I'm totally nuking you, and see if I get them. It might work. All right. So Eric, I guess Eric is back to being the dumb one again. Eric was similarly hoodwinked by the prankster, emailing as his older brother Donald Trump Jr. But he soon caught on. Oh, congrats. Eric, thank you. You've restored my faith in humanity, which I don't have very much of, but I really, at this point, I was like, I'm getting off the planet. I'm leaving. It's over. Forget it. There's no way this planet can be saved. I'm out of here. He caught on and responded, I have sent this to law enforcement who will handle from here. That's good. Finally, a Trump who will report something bogus happening over email to law enforcement. Now, the response to that should have been, Eric, where were you in June of 2016 to advise Don Jr. that he should have sent those emails to law enforcement, who will handle from here? Anyway, neither Huntsman nor Trump would comment on the record, of course. The email prankster told CNN he never heard from anyone in law enforcement about his email to Eric Trump. Eric forgot. He never did get around to that. The email prankster tweets under the name Sinon Reborn, SINON_Reborn, interesting, where he posts his pranks and describes himself as a lazy anarchist. I don't know whether that's supposed to be, it must be his Twitter because it's an at Sinon, SINON_Reborn, if you feel like following. In June, he hoodwinked Lloyd Blankfein, CEO of Goldman Sachs, and Michael Corbat of Citigroup, and he did the same to Barclays CEO Jess Staley in May. Staley, thinking he was being emailed by Barclays chairman John McFarlane, praised the man he thought was his colleague in effusive detail, saying, among other things, that he had all the fearlessness of Clapton. The prankster said Staley was the most surprising of the responses because it was the first one and because he responded in such gushing detail. Wow. Well, I don't know what to tell you. I guess there's a whole career out here for this thing. Who knows what you could get out of people on that. I don't encourage you to do this kind of hacking. But if you do, let us know what results you get. I guess I don't know. I am astonished by this. Pete says he was entertained, at least, by the genuine reactions to the astonishment of how dumb people can be about these things. I shouldn't be too hypercritical. I could see myself falling for something like this at some point. Just no one would, to this point, no one would ever do that to me, because what would be the point? What would I possibly tell you? I don't have any secrets. I don't have any bank accounts. I don't have anything. There's nothing I can reveal to people. I try to be vigilant about these things. I've certainly seen things in my email inbox in the past where I've said, this is clearly an attempt to pretend to be somebody who I know to get me to respond. It's not their email address, and it's just too fishy sounding, and it usually involves a direct request for doing something or sending money or clicking on something. And I say that's just too dangerous, and you have to assume that this is a fake. But it's almost always come from somebody that I'm not intimately familiar with, but I've perhaps had some email correspondence with before. And I realized, for instance, pretty quickly that this wouldn't necessarily be the kind of person who I would expect would feel comfortable emailing me out of the blue and saying, hey, I need money in, some foreign country. I'm stuck. Well, you wouldn't email me about that. That's just, you're just trying out their entire email inbox. That's a hacker. But I guess somebody could, if they weren't looking for something out of me in terms of, money or clicking on a link that would raise a flag, you could probably trick me into mistaking something. And I guess it's possible. Possible? Maybe? That I could get an email one day from one of my own brothers who would say, oh, yeah, by the way, I have a new email address, so just keep track of that. And you can reach me here from now on. I suppose I could be fooled, but I try to be more careful than that. I don't know. Pete says I'm being too generous. Yeah, that's true. As Michael notes, these emails had did they have flashing red warning lights on them, or is that just a filter that they put this thing through? I see the embedded video here has everything backgrounded in red with white type on it, and you can see suspected spam in the tag of the subject line. Is it also red? That would certainly catch my attention. I don't know whether it was really red or whether they put a filter through it. Let's see. I mean, I guess I could play the video, but I don't care that much. All these people are idiots, and you and I would never fall for something like this. Let's just put it that way. And then also, we're pretty safe because if we do fall for something like this, it's almost certain that CNN won't be reporting on it at all, and we'll be in the clear. This is really amazing. I didn't expect this story to take quite that turn. That's astonishing to me. All right, well, thank God they weren't looking for anything serious in all of that. I imagine within days there will be people looking for that. Okay, all right. Figure of speech, sorry. All right, so there wasn't flashing red warning lights. That's the figure of speech. It does look, I mean, they turned it red. So for a second there, I thought maybe I'm underestimating the warnings that you would get on certain email systems. You would think that people at that level would have, I guess if anybody's supposed to have an email system that actually would give you flashing red warning lights. I don't know what's involved in getting a system like that hooked up, but you would hope that people at high levels of government or business would have such a thing. But if they did, it wouldn't do them any damn good because that it didn't help them at all. That's pretty amazing. Let's see. Do we have more that we ought to share in these things? There's the Washington Post's initial reporting on the fact that Trump, I'm sort of interested in seeing if we can at least skim through this. How did they establish the fact that Trump, in fact, dictated Don Jr.'s misleading statement? That is Ashley Parker, Carol Leonig, Phil Rucker, and Tom Hamburger all on the bylines for that piece. Trump dictated son's misleading statement on meeting with Russian lawyer. On the sidelines of the G20 summit in Germany last month. Again, we start here on that. President Trump's advisors discussed how to respond to a new revelation that Trump's oldest son had met with a Russian lawyer during the 2016 campaign, a disclosure the advisors knew carried political and potentially legal peril. The strategy, the advisors agreed, should be for Donald Trump Jr. to release a statement to get ahead of the story. They wanted to be truthful so their account couldn't be repudiated later if the full details emerged. That sounds like a better plan, I think, than the one they came up with. But within hours, at the president's direction, the plan changed. Flying home from Germany on July 8th aboard Air Force One, Trump personally dictated a statement in which Trump Jr. said that he and the Russian lawyer had primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children when they met in June 2016, according to multiple people with knowledge of the deliberations. The statement, issued to the New York Times as it prepared an article, emphasized that the subject of the meeting was not a campaign issue at the time. The claims were later shown to be misleading. Over the next 3 days, multiple accounts of the meeting were provided to the news media as public pressure mounted, with Trump Jr. ultimately acknowledging that he had accepted the meeting after receiving an email promising damaging information about Hillary Clinton as part of a Russian government effort to help his father's campaign. The extent of the president's personal intervention in his son's response, the details of which have not previously been reported, adds to a series of actions that Trump has taken that some advisors fear could place him and some members of his inner circle in legal jeopardy. As the special counsel, Robert Mueller, looks into potential obstruction of justice as part of his broader investigation of Russian interference in the 2016 election, these advisors worry that the president's direct involvement leaves him needlessly vulnerable to allegations of a cover-up. This was unnecessary, said one of the president's advisors, who, like most other people interviewed for this article, spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive internal deliberations. Now, someone can claim he's the one who attempted to mislead. Somebody can argue the president is saying he doesn't want you to say the whole truth. Trump has already come under criticism for steps he has taken to challenge and undercut the Russia investigation, firing Comey, of course, Let's see. And after asking him if he could end the investigation into Mike Flynn, National Director of National Intelligence Daniel Coates told associates that Trump asked him in March if he could intervene with Comey, in addition to all of this, to get the Bureau to back off of its focus on Flynn. In addition, Trump has repeatedly criticized Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself for overseeing the FBI's Russian investigation, a decision that was one factor leading to the appointment of Mueller. And he has privately discussed his power to issue pardons, including for himself, and explored potential avenues for undercutting Mueller's work. Although misleading the public or the news media is not a crime, advisors to Trump and his family told the Washington Post that they fear any indication that Trump was seeking to hide information about contacts between his campaign and Russians almost inevitably would draw additional scrutiny from Mueller. Trump, they say, is increasingly acting as his own lawyer, strategist, and publicist, often disregarding the recommendations of the professionals he has hired. This recalls discussions we had during the campaign with Greg about Trump's style in general, that he was inadvisable, that no matter who he hired, he was calling his own shots. And I guess we're right back there. He refuses to sit still, the presidential advisor said. He doesn't think he's in any legal jeopardy. So he really views this as a political problem he is going to solve by himself, even though he has no political skills whatsoever. Trump has said that the Russia investigation is the greatest witch hunt in political history, a phrase that he also stole from the Russians they met with, by the way, calling it an elaborate hoax created by Democrats, not China, to explain why Clinton lost an election she should have won. Because Trump believes he is innocent, some advisors explained, he therefore does not think he is at any legal risk for a cover-up. In his mind, they said, there is nothing to conceal. Well, others may reach their own conclusions about this. The White House directed all questions for this article to the president's legal team, who are a bunch of liars, we later find out. Although we had guessed that already. One of the Trump attorneys, Jay Sekulow, declined to discuss the specifics of the president's actions and his role in crafting his son's statement about the Russian contact. Sekulow issued a one-sentence statement in response to a list of detailed questions from the Post. Apart from being of no consequence, the characterizations are misinformed, inaccurate, and not pertinent, Sekulow's statement read, except, well, we know that's all a lie from the previous article. Trump Jr. did not respond to a request for comment. His attorney, Alan Futterfass, again, more evidence for Oliver Willis's Matrix scenario. Futterfass, really? Told the Post that he and his client, quote, were fully prepared and absolutely prepared. They're very prepared. You can see this in their statement. Fully prepared and absolutely prepared to make a fulsome statement. Wow. $10 for that word. About the meeting, the statement about the meeting, which, what led up to it and what was discussed. Except that's what you told us you were giving us last time, and it turned out to be Donald Trump Sr.'s misleading statement about it. But this time Don will really give a statement, and it'll be fulsome. Okay. Asked about Trump intervening, Futterfass said, I have no evidence to support that theory. Just, newspaper reports. He described the process of drafting a statement as, quote, a communal situation that involved communications, people, and various lawyers. Did it involve you? No? Then you don't really know anything, do you? Various lawyers. So this is kind of interesting. I guess these appear to be, this would be statements that they got from Futterfass before Aaron Blake was able to write the piece highlighting how badly Sekulow had lied about all this. So it's very interesting that Futterfass still at that point willing to say this. I have no evidence to support that theory. Did you, you're the guy's lawyer. Did you help draft it? No. Okay, then. I think that's really kind of case closed, but maybe it's only circumstantial evidence that Trump himself wrote it. That's true. Peter Zeidenberg, The deputy special prosecutor who investigated the George W. Bush administration's leak of CIA operative Valerie Plame's identity said Mueller will have to dig into the crafting of Trump Jr.'s statement aboard Air Force One. Prosecutors typically assume that any misleading statement is an effort to throw investigators off the track, Ziedenberg said. The thing that really strikes me about this is the stupidity of involving the president. I think we have that right. The stupidity of involving the president, Ziedenberg said. They are still treating this like a family-run business and that they have a PR problem. What they don't seem to understand is that this is a criminal investigation involving all of them. The debate about how to deal with the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting began weeks before any news organization began to ask questions about it. This is interesting. Kushner's legal team first learned about the meeting when doing research to respond to congressional requests for information. Congressional investigators wanted to know about any contacts the president's son-in-law and senior advisor had with Russian officials or business people. Kushner's lawyers came across what they immediately recognized would eventually become a problematic story. A string of emails showed Kushner attended a meeting with a Russian lawyer at Trump Tower in the midst of the campaign, one he had failed to disclose, as he failed to disclose all of them, of course. Trump Jr. had arranged it, and then campaign chairman Paul Manafort had also attended. I can imagine the Kushner lawyers at that point going over his emails and saying, "What is this? This is nuts. You didn't disclose this at all. This is exactly what they're looking for. We're going to have to disclose this at some point. Why didn't this come up?" The fact that this was arranged by Don Jr. and attended by you and Manafort is, this is going to be a major, major story. Why wasn't this on your disclosure? To compound what was at best a public relations fiasco, the emails, which had not yet surfaced publicly, showed Trump Jr. responding to the prospect of negative information on Clinton from Russia. I love it. Lawyers and advisors for Trump, his son and son-in-law, gamed out strategies for disclosing the information to try to minimize the fallout of these new links between the Trump family and Russia, according to people familiar with the deliberations. Hope Hicks. Everyone, how does she do it? Hope Hicks, the White House Director of Strategic Communications, not dumbass communications. That was Scaramucci, and now it's going to be somebody else. Although, I'm wondering when he's just going to make Hope Hicks Director of Communications, and whether Melania won't allow it. Wink, wink. I don't know. Hope Hicks is the White House Director of Strategic Communications, you see, and one of the president's most trusted and loyal aides, and Josh Raffo, a White House spokesman who works closely with Kushner and his wife, Ivanka Trump, who's doing nothing, by the way, huddled with Kushner's lawyers, and they advocated for a more transparent approach. Yeah, right, sure. According to people with knowledge of the conversations. Guess who those people are? My guess, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. They're familiar with the approach, and they would be willing to tell, after calls for anonymity, tell the press, well, you see, Jared and I were calling for more transparency, because we're all about the transparency, as you know. This is off the record, by the way. In one scenario, these people said Kushner's team had talked about sharing everything, including the contents of the emails, with a mainstream news organization. I really don't think so. Hicks and Raffel declined to comment because they know it was a lie. Kushner attorney Abby Lowell also declined to comment. I'm not getting into that. The president's outside legal team, led by Mark Kasowitz, who I thought by the time this article was written had already resigned, but I guess not. Well, I think he did. For whatever reason, he's identified as the leader of the outside legal team, even in this article, had suggested that the details be given to Circa, an online news organization that the Kasowitz team thought would be friendly to Trump. I mean, it exists. I've heard of it, but that's not really a mainstream news organization. But okay, they were looking for a friendly voice. Circa had inquired in previous days about the meeting, according to people familiar with the discussions. How did that happen? Probably Jared Kushner told them and then said, in exchange for favorable treatment, I'll give you a big scoop. That's my guess. The president's legal team planned to cast the June 2016 meeting as a potential setup by Democratic operatives, hoping to entrap Trump Jr. and, by extension, the presumptive Republican nominee, according to people familiar with discussions. That's interesting. That did bear itself out. They did actually try and level that accusation. Are they saying that they ended up abandoning that? And that's the president's legal team coming up with that, which, by the way, would, of course, include Jay Sekulow, who was just caught out lying on this thing. This is a real crap storm here. All right, well, let's see. Circumstances changed when the New York Times began asking about the Trump Tower meeting. Can't give it to Serco when the New York Times is out there. Though advisors believed that the newspaper knew few of the details. While the president, Kushner, and Ivanka Trump were attending the G20 summit in Germany, why were Kushner and Ivanka Trump there? The Times asked for White House comment on the impetus and reason for the meeting. During breaks away from the summit, Kushner and Ivanka Trump gathered with Hicks and Raffel to discuss Kushner's response to the inquiry. According to people with knowledge of the discussions, Kushner's legal team joined at times by phone. By the way, note, please, to Don Trump Jr., I know you got no reason to take my word for it, no reason to take advice or anything from me, unless I email you as Eric Trump, in which case, by all means, do please believe it. Note to self, let's do this after the show. It may have had something to do with the fact that Kushner and Ivanka were immediately physically on hand to discuss this stuff with your dad and his top advisors. That could be true. And everybody kind of knows by now at this point Ivanka's his favorite in all this. But I just wanted to point out to you that what we're seeing here is once they discovered that there was a really serious issue about this, Jared gets to meet with your dad and plot out how to pin it on you and how to let him skate. I just thought maybe you would want to take note of that. If, say, you were ever asked to testify about this and your dad said, hey, you got to help me out here, you might want to keep in the back of your mind that when the chips started to fall, your dad offered Jared the escape pod that should have been yours. And so far it's working out, believe it or not. Now, eventually they'll catch him too, so maybe you'll take some solace in that. If so, email me at jared.kushner@gmail.com and let me know. And I promise I won't even tell Sean Hannity about it, let's say. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of interesting. I guess maybe it was physical proximity. It may be that he's Ivanka's husband and Ivanka is his favorite, but I don't know. Anyway, that won't be available to you because, of course, you're supposed to be firewalled off from your dad, and you guys are totally separate from one another so that you don't mix the business and the governance of the country. Not that that was really ever going to get mixed with anything that any Trump did, but remember that. You guys are supposed to be in totally separate orbits, including things like your dad issuing explanations for what you did. Anyway, so Hicks and Raffel discussed with Kushner and his lawyers how to respond to this. Hicks also spoke by phone with Trump Jr. Interesting. So Hope knew what Kushner was doing and what Trump Jr. was not doing and kept him on the outside on all this. Again, say people familiar with the conversations, Kushner's team concluded that the best strategy would be to err on the side of transparency because they believed the complete story would eventually emerge. Sure, right. The discussions among the president's advisors consumed much of the day, and they continued as they prepared to board Air Force One that evening for the flight home. But before everyone boarded the plane, Trump had overruled the consensus, according to the people with knowledge of the events. It remains unclear exactly how much the president knew at the time of the flight about Trump Jr.'s meeting, but he's going to issue Trump Jr.'s statement anyway. I don't know anything about this meeting, but why don't I tell everybody everything there is to know about it? The president directed that Trump Jr.'s statement to the Times described the meeting as unimportant. He wanted the statement to say that the meeting had been initiated by the Russian lawyer and primarily was about her pet issue, the adoption of Russian children. Air Force One took off from Germany shortly after 6 p.m., about noon in Washington. In a forward cabin, Trump was busy working on his son's statement, according to people with knowledge of events. By the way, just for a pause, I mean, I know Don Jr. is kind of enthralled to his dad for a number of reasons. But, I mean, for the rest of you, if you were involved in any sort of trouble, or, you know, not even trouble, let's say you're not in trouble. Let's say it's a question about what did you have for dinner last night? And I say, I want to know what you had for dinner, but I don't want you to answer. But I want you to tell me, is there anybody who you would authorize to speak on your behalf? Yes, sure, probably. My husband, my wife, my mom, my son, somebody who was there, right? All right. Is there anybody that under no circumstances should I ever accept the word of, I should never accept their word with respect to anything, much less what you did when they weren't around? In other words, who's the spokesperson least desirable? Who's the worst possible bet for getting you out of trouble or keeping you out of trouble? Even though there's no trouble on the horizon, who's the worst spokesperson you can imagine to allow to speak on your behalf about anything? And I'm sure most of you would by now have said, yes, I can think of somebody. Ordinarily, I might have said, I don't know, Hitler? Well, he's dead, so, yeah. Well, Donald Trump is like the last person you want issuing a statement of any kind on your behalf for any reason. I don't care if you're in trouble. I don't care if you're not in trouble. I don't care if you're dead. I mean, if you're Frederick Douglass, you don't want Donald Trump speaking about you. He's just going to get it wrong. Why in the world? I mean, it is, if it's different for anybody, it's different for Donald Trump Jr., certainly. But, oh my God. I mean, even he must at some point be saying, oh, there's nothing I can do about this, but, oh my God, Dad is going to make this so much worse. Can you imagine this guy's dad jokes? Like, knock, knock, who's there? You're under arrest by the FBI. Yeah. Ha, Dad, under arrest by the FBI. Who? No, seriously, this is the FBI. You let your father issue a statement on your behalf and you're under arrest. It's foolish. Don't let anybody do this to you. Ugh. Wow. Well, he let him do it. Anyway, back to the story. And I don't need to make up my own stories, although they're a lot more interesting sometimes than the ones that are real. So where were we? Air Force One took off from Germany. Trump's busy working on his son's statement in the forward cabin. The president dictates the statement to Hicks. How does she do it? Pencil, paper. Who served as a go-between with Trump Jr., who was not on the plane, sharing edits between the two men, according to people with knowledge of the discussions, including, I would guess, the Russians and the FBI who have audio tape of the discussions, but okay. In the early afternoon, I'm sure the FBI doesn't have that. Well, they might now, but in the early afternoon, Eastern Time, Trump Jr.'s team put out the statement to the Times. It was 4 sentences long, describing the encounter as a short introductory meeting. Okay, so do we have the dynamics here? Trump writes it down or puzzles it out and tells Hope Hicks. He probably never writes anything. All right, Hope writes it down, and Hope calls Don Jr. and says, here's what your statement is going to be. Your dad says you should say this about this meeting. A short introductory meeting. We primarily discussed a program about the adoption of Russian children that was active and popular with American families years ago and was since ended by the Russian government. But it was not a campaign issue at the time, and there was no follow-up, the statement read. Trump Jr. went on to say, I don't know whether that's supposed to mean he says it later and we actually saw the words come out of his mouth, but even that doesn't matter. He's probably just reading a script. Or whether this is part of the statement. I can't remember. Maybe you'll recognize the words. I was asked to attend the meeting by an acquaintance. Okay, it's the old statement. But was not told the name of the person I would be meeting with beforehand. You know what? That was so dumb as a proposition that I had a hard time believing at the time that Donald Trump himself wasn't the one who said that. But I was credulous there, and I believed that Donald Trump Jr. might actually have put that statement out. Now, it makes sense to think that it would have been in consultation with his father's people, but I don't know even then, if I thought Trump himself dictated it. I don't know. Hard to say. So have I fallen victim the way Chuck Todd and George Stephanopoulos have, that you would immediately assume that there's no way the president himself would allow himself to be involved with something that's stupid, right? Because a normal person wouldn't. But again, this is not normal. Over the next hour, word spread through emails and calls to other Trump family advisors and lawyers about the statement that Trump Jr. had sent to the Times. Some lawyers for the president and for Kushner were surprised and frustrated, maybe, advisors later learned. According to people briefed on the dispute, some lawyers tried to reach Futterfass and their clients and began asking why the president had been involved. On the flight, Kushner worked with his team, including one of his lawyers, who called into the plane. His lawyers have said that Kushner's initial omission of the meeting was an error, but that in an effort to be fully transparent, again, although Don Jr. was saying the same thing at the time, he had updated his government filing to include this meeting with a Russian person, which he briefly attended at the request of his brother-in-law, Donald Trump Jr. Kushner's legal team referred all questions about the meeting to Trump Jr. The Times story revealing the existence of the 2016 meeting was posted online about 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Roughly 4 hours later, Air Force One touched down at Joint Base Andrews. Trump's family members and advisors departed the plane, and they knew the problem they had once hoped to contain would soon grow bigger. Well, that is a bit of a disaster, isn't it? But I guess the biggest upshot in all this is, Trump decided to involve himself personally against probably lots of advice, and that once again, we don't know how Hope Hicks did it, but she involved herself in everything again, and to no one's surprise, it is once again a disaster. Wow. Okay. Well, that's the story, and I guess they're sticking to it, which is really rather amazing. All right, let's see. There's other stories that require attention as well. Let's see. What have we here? I think we've said everything that there is about Scaramucci. I mean, for the time being. I'm sure we'll find out some more fun stuff in the days to come. Let's see. A couple of stories we can touch on here. One, let's go over to the story of the day over on the legislative side. I need to pick up some of the tweets that I saw earlier about the Russian sanctions bill. I mentioned that in yesterday's show, but we had taped that over the weekend. And I remember just in passing asking the question whether, in response to the then breaking news that Putin was going to expel, he said, 755 American diplomats from Russia. And then we kind of wondered, do we even have that many American diplomats in Russia? And our former ambassador to Russia informed us that we do not. Later in the day, the explanation became, well, there are 755 people if you include Russians employed by the U.S. Embassy, in functionary positions. But I don't think is Putin expelling people who even took a routine job working in the embassy? He's now going to expel them from Russia or what? I don't know. I don't know where the miscommunication, if it was a miscommunication, came in. But at any rate, I further wondered, aren't we still pre-signing of the sanctions bill here? The sanctions haven't been put in place, and Putin is already pre-retaliating. And of course, remember that during the very end of the campaign, when still then President Obama was imposing sanctions on the Russians, Trump was praising Putin's forbearance and his patience and wisdom in foregoing any retaliation at that point. He was waiting for you idiot, to become president so that he could retaliate then, knowing that you were going to paint yourself into a corner where you wouldn't be able to respond. Anyway, it turns out that the sanctions bill has not been signed. Let's see if I can grab I should check quickly the Daily Kos front page to see anytime I can share one of their stories rather than going to the traditional news media. I like to give our spin out on these things, but it turns out that the bill has not yet been signed, though it was passed some days ago, and the claim in the White House is that they have not received the bill. And we can try and track it down through Congress's own websites. And sometimes this is the case, mechanically speaking. They do sometimes, there is sometimes some significant delay in delivering the papers. Remember the papers. Delivering the papers physically to the president. The enrollment process sometimes takes a while and sometimes can be drawn out. It can, at the direction of the Speaker of the House, for instance, take quite a while to enroll the bill and get it properly prepared and then to deliver it. And the president hasn't yet signed it. And then I saw people speculating on Twitter today about whether or not Trump is trying, he's uncomfortable with these sanctions, of course, because they're against his best friend, Putin, or the guy he imagines as his best friend. Putin doesn't give a crap one way or the other, I'm sure, about Trump, except to the extent that he can use him to leverage dumb stuff out of the United States. And even that opportunity, that window is probably closing. As evidenced by the sanction bill, right? The whole point of this sanctions bill was to remove the president's ability to unilaterally undo the sanctions or to fail to impose any of the sanctions, which I think is still open to some question. And I imagine if we ever get around to a signing of this thing, we will also find ourselves shortly thereafter in possession of a signing statement simply declaring that part of the bill null and void because president, and he gets to do whatever he wants. And he might even have some basis there, believe it or not. So, we'll have to see how he deals with that. But the idea that it hasn't even showed up in his office yet seems a little strange. And people were wondering, is he trying to set up some sort of pocket veto for this thing? Ordinarily, that would not be that wouldn't be something that's available to him. The pocket veto, generally speaking, really only works reliably at the end of a sitting Congress. When a Congress has adjourned sine die, and 10 days since presentment has not yet elapsed. That's really the only time the president can pocket veto anything, unless he's trying to say that the August recess counts as an adjournment, which, for the purposes of the constitutional mechanics here, would prevent him from returning a veto message to them. Then I don't know what he's grasping at. If you don't sign, ordinarily, in the ordinary course of things, if the president doesn't sign a bill that's presented to him within 10 days, it becomes law regardless, which is a great option for presidents who don't want to sign something but don't want to stand in the way of it actually becoming law and involve themselves in that headache. But I don't know if Donald Trump is smart enough to use that consciously, but he is smart enough to appear to use that by being too lazy to do his job. And everybody says, what a brilliant move, either attempting a pocket veto or just not having his fingerprints on this bill by refusing to sign it. And, I would say 50-50 that he just had no idea that he was supposed to, even though he loves nothing more than signing stuff. Unless you tell him in the morning, you got to go sign something, there's a pretty good chance that he may have no idea that that's something he's supposed to do. If you bring him to the room and put a pen in his hand and say, it's one of those signing things here, sir. Oh, good. I love those. Fantastic. Extra scoop of ice cream for you for setting this up. Anyway, I guess I wanted to check on, see if I can find a newspaper account of the sanctions bill not having been signed at this point, just so we have a source for you. Let's see, LA Times has something from a couple hours ago, although it's about the content of the sanctions bill. Trump silent as Russia retaliates against sanctions bill. Trump to sign sanctions bill on Russia this week. Oh, that's the Xinhua Chinese news organization 25 minutes ago. But basically, I guess this time confirming that it hasn't yet been signed. I wonder if what we could do is, well, maybe it won't be something we do on the air, although if I talk you through it, then we might as well go ahead and do it. But if you go to congress.gov, we can look up the bill. Right up at the top here, they have a nice feature. Usually if something is current, it's often among the most viewed bills. The top 10 most viewed bills is up at the top here. One of them called the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. Does that stand for anything? Not really. Would be a good misspelling of cats. But that's about an HR 3664. Let's see what the legislative history is there. Yeah, there we are. And here's where we begin to run into some confusion. They usually will tell you when you click on a bill, show me what actions have been taken on it. The latest action will be listed. The latest action is a 7/28/17 entry presented to President. So, in other words, let's see, the 28th, until the 29th, 30th, 31st, and 1st. So it's been presented, it's listed for 4 days as having been presented to the President. The President, of course, insists it hasn't been presented to him. So, let's go on and just take a look at all the actions and see about when that might have happened. It was passed by the Senate without amendment on the 27th. Message on Senate action sent to the House on the 27th. And then the House presented it to the President on 7/28. So, let's see. So that means the papers would have ended up back at the House. And it would have been up to the Speaker to direct how quickly this thing may have been delivered. And it may be, pardon me, that they dispatched this thing, but along with the notice that, take your time getting over to the White House if you want to do the president a favor. On the other hand, no real indication as to why the Speaker would be interested in doing such a favor. But I guess if they had a private talk about it and agreed that they would slow walk this thing, or that the President was going to try to attempt to use the August recess as a lengthy enough adjournment to satisfy the requirements of the Constitution for a pocket veto. But the language on the pocket veto, by the way, we might as well just grab it and see if we can't come up with it. I think it's one of those bits that really should be in Article 2, but isn't. It's in Article 1 instead, along with the presentment clause. Anyway, the language, as I recall, calls for the Congress being in adjournment for long enough such that the adjournment would prevent the return of the papers to the Congress along with a veto note. Yeah, here we are. It's Article 1, Section 7, Clause 1, 2. Oh my goodness, this is one long clause. Is it Clause 2? Right down at the bottom of what would be Clause 2 here. If any bill shall not be returned by the President within 10 days, and by returned we mean veto here. It doesn't mention the word veto. The whole clause reads this way. Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate shall, before it becomes a law, be presented to the President of the United States. If he approve, he shall sign it, but if not, he shall return it with his objections to that House in which it shall have originated, who shall enter the objections at large on their journal and proceed to reconsider it. If, after such reconsideration, 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill, it shall be sent together with the objections to the other House, once again prescribing the path that the papers are supposed to take, to the other House, by which it shall likewise be reconsidered, and if approved by 2/3 of that House, it shall become a law. But In all such cases, the votes of both houses shall be determined by yeas and nays, and the names of the persons voting for and against the bill shall be entered in the journal of each house respectively. If any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, Sundays excepted, so we do have that, we're down to 3 days now, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it, unless the Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. It's very difficult to prevent the return of the papers at this stage of the game in modern practice. In modern practice, even when the House and Senate are mutually agreed to be in adjournment, and that's what it requires, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if they're agreed to be in adjournment, they both leave behind permanent officials whose job it is to receive and log messages for them in their absence, and presumably let them know if anything super serious comes, like a declaration of war, or for that matter, a veto, or for that matter, presidential appointments and nominations. Recess appointments is the context that I'm getting at here. The recent Noel Canning decision by the Supreme Court makes it virtually impossible to pull off a legitimate recess appointment really during any recess but those in between sittings of new Congresses. I guess you might still be able to preserve the inter-session recess as an official recess, that is the break between the first and second sessions of any particular Congress, the first and second years of any particular Congress. But that's a gap that usually exists only for a few seconds in modern practice. Other things you might be familiar with, of course, are the use of pro forma sessions in the House and Senate to prevent there from being a long enough recess to try and sneak a recess appointment by. All indications are that they will end up having to do the same thing over the August recess, although I'm sure the president would like very much to make recess appointments. They might try anyway, because who cares? I don't care that the Supreme Court said this thing. Let them say it again. And in the meantime, I will say I want this. They'll say no, and I'll say, stupid liberal judges, we should replace them all. And my base will love it. It's a good play for him. And I predict that we'll see something like it very shortly. But standard practice for a while now has been for the House and Senate to just hold pro forma sessions and do so for the purpose, it's understood, of preventing recess appointments. If it can work to prevent recess appointments, in other words, and finally get around to the point of this, it can work to prevent a pocket veto as well. The idea of the pocket veto was just what should they do with veto messages that are sent back to a Congress that no longer exists. If they were to adjourn, sine die, and break and go home, and the president, after the fact, were to veto something, what would be the effect of it? You know, the founders decided on the pocket veto and put it in there. But the idea that that should be effective against a Congress which has just taken a break for a couple of weeks, fully intends to come back and could be summoned back at any time, and has an agent to receive their papers and organize them and hold them while awaiting their return, I don't think that's going to be very convincing to a court. But they'll just serve as a basis for calling for packing the Supreme Court or executing all the members of the Supreme Court or whatever President Trump should decide to come up with at that time. Anyway, this should not affect a pocket veto. If he sits on it for 10 days, it should just become law, as it usually would, regardless of what they decide to do for August. Now, I guess one other question that's kind of hanging out there with regard to the August recess, a lot of people have wondered, well, if the Democrats are in the minority in both the House and the Senate, can they prevent the House and Senate from simply adjourning or taking that recess for the entire month and opening themselves up to recess appointments from the president? And the usual answer is no. That's not something that can happen. The House and Senate must mutually agree to recesses longer than 3 days. And although the majorities in both houses would no doubt love to agree to that, that happens by resolution. And though it would be a simple thing for the House by majority vote to adopt a resolution saying it is our intention to recess for the entirety of the month of August, the Senate, in considering the resolution by which they would agree to that, would likely find objection made by Democrats and a filibuster threatened, 60 votes not being available to invoke cloture on consideration of the resolution. It wouldn't be adopted. And without that adoption of the resolution, the House and Senate would have to remain more or less, they wouldn't be in active session, but they'd have to hold pro forma sessions in order to satisfy the requirement of the Constitution that an adjournment of longer than 3 days among both houses has to be mutually agreed to, and they couldn't get that agreement on the record thanks to the filibuster of the adjournment resolution. So it should, by all rights, be preventable, even by a minority in the Senate. So it's so it's kind of strange that this is even coming up. I don't know why the White House would be claiming that they don't have this legislation and what good it would do them to delay for very long. But it really hasn't been all that long. But I did see this morning Jennifer Hayden, Scout Finch, responding to a report this morning that the president hadn't yet signed the Russia sanctions bill because they say they haven't received it. And she was pointing out, hey, it doesn't make any sense. 3 days ago, the White House confirmed they'd reviewed the final text and announced that they intended to sign it. How did they review it if it wasn't sent? Well, one possible answer is, of course, that they reviewed an electronic copy, which was sent to them, but the papers, they might claim, hadn't been sent. But Congress.gov begs to differ and says that it was dispatched and presented to the president on 7/28. So we'll have to see whether that sorts itself out any better over the next couple of days. Speaking of which, I was also struck by another tweet that I saw this morning that apparently the White House, I just thought they made good juxtaposition. White House non-committal when asked if President Trump will follow through with emergency declaration regarding the opioid crisis. But I guess no one should be surprised that the president is non-committal when asked if he'll follow through on anything that he promised to do. All of what they do is up in the air based on whether or not the president feels like giving up on television for a few minutes. Let's see, a couple of questions here and comments to catch up on. Michael Musson has a couple of them here. One of them from way back when. Let's see. Amazing that you made this comment without the slightest sense of irony, saying our country to Native Americans. It wasn't me. I didn't say it. He's pointing to the tweet of, Lucian B. Wintrich, whose name rings a bell as isn't he one of the weirdo alt-right guys who showed up as a reporter for Breitbart or something like that? Oh, Gateway Pundit. Yeah, that's right. One of the many people who have relished the opportunity to take a picture at the White House podium giving the OK sign, which they sometimes like to either, depending on who you ask, pretend or wink, wink, acknowledge that it's a white power symbol instead. And I think it's a hard name to miss. Anyway, let's see. What have we here? This is, he's complaining about God knows what, about immigration here. And he says something about blah, blah, blah. And they break into, he says, our country. And Michael's saying, amazing that you made this comment without any irony, saying our country to Native Americans. Is that who we're looking at here? I can't tell who's. He's complaining about a picture of three folks having their picture taken, giving the finger to Mount Rushmore, which as selfies or other photos go, I would say probably didn't make them popular there, but it makes considerably more sense if they are Native Americans. They would, of course, be upset with what is to Native Americans the desecration of a sacred mountain site, carving it up and putting white American hero presidents on there instead of leaving it as it was and leaving it to them as it should have been, a sacred mountain. That is kind of tough. I can't tell from the picture or from the caption exactly who they are, but Michael seems to indicate, I guess it must have come out by now, that these are Native American folks as opposed to illegal immigrants, whatever that might mean. From, why would you, is that the insinuation? Did Lucian think because they were sort of brown-skinned that they were Mexicans? Is that what people are now sneaking over the border in Mexico, running all the way up to Mount Rushmore to give it the finger and then going, I don't know. I guess trying to make sense out of what they're thinking is too much of a headache for me. What other comments Michael has got for us here? I think we'll move on to these. I thought Congress wasn't adjourning so the president can't make a recess appointment of a new AG. I think so too. And there's probably a lot of sentiment in favor of that, as it turns out, among Republicans too. The loudest complainers about the mistreatment of Sessions is coming from his previous colleagues, his fellow Republican senators. They too might be disturbed at the prospect, for a number of reasons, of the appointment of a new attorney general, were he to resign or be fired somehow during the recess. So, yeah, I think that's what their plan is. His other comment here, maybe the White House does know how signing works. Have they actually signed a bill yet? And again, I don't know. I bring that up too, in response to what I saw Jen and others tweeting about the dysfunction around this bill and around other things. Again, I remind everybody that it's still absolutely my contention that you should never assume that this president has seen anything, said anything, written anything, signed anything, made any appointments ever without examining everything fully. I still, to this day, will maintain that messages that are received in the Senate that purport to be nominations for judicial places, or for any executive nomination, anything, need to be taken with a huge grain of salt. They need to be physically examined. There needs to be a chain of custody established. And basically, yes, absolutely, this is the case. The assumptions that we make for normal presidents, because again, this is not normal, the assumptions we make for normal presidencies, for the sake of remaining sane and having some semblance of order to our operations, we just assume that when a document arrives that purports to have been issued and signed by the president, we don't question its provenance. We don't question whether he really signed it. We don't question whether he had an understanding, whether he was mentally capable of understanding what's in it. Might not even be really, legally speaking, interested in that, but it might make a good question at some point. But we don't harbor a lot of suspicions that these things have been forged for other presidents. But now we have to, because fake news on every front, and that goes back I don't know how long. How many times has he? Well, we just spent the whole hour of the show explaining that they basically forged a document from Donald Trump Jr. They told everybody this is his statement. It was actually dictated by Donald Trump himself. They tried to pass it off as somebody else's work. That's a forged document. At this stage, I don't believe that anything that's coming out of the White House, signed or not, is real. It certainly hasn't been vetted. They should check everything, and they should, it creates enormous headaches. The upshot of refusing to believe that the president had signed and issued these things would have to be, I guess, that the president would have to come to the president's room in the Capitol and sign them in front of congressional witnesses. An incredible imposition on a president's time and energy, if he has any, that ordinarily would be intolerable for any normal president. But again, this is not normal. You've brought it on yourself. We can no longer take your word for it. And yes, it's going to necessarily limit how much you can do, because it's going to eat up an enormous part of your day to have to come to the president's room in the Capitol building and sign it in front of witnesses. But I'm okay with that. It's probably best for all of us. To this point, I don't think any or very many of the Republicans in Congress would have agreed to that. They would have just said, you're just imposing a ridiculous standard on this president. But I'm starting to believe that we might get more and more agreement as time goes on, even for a demand like that. Speaking of fake news, I haven't yet gotten to this thing that Armando sent me right up at the beginning of the show. It says it's an amazing story, and it's from NPR, and it looks like could be another instance of fake news. What do we got here? Behind Fox News' baseless Seth Rich story. We all know about that one. The Untold Tale. So that's one we don't know about because it's untold. David Folkenflick on this one, and ordinarily you would listen to this on the radio, of course, but we don't want to violate their copyright, and I don't think we have time to play their whole segment. Let's take a look at this. The Fox News Channel and a wealthy supporter of President Trump worked in concert under the watchful eye of the White House. Maybe Donald Trump just dictated the whole thing himself, who knows, to concoct a story about the death of a young Democratic National Committee aide, according to a lawsuit filed Tuesday. The explosive claim is part of the lawsuit filed against Fox News by Rod Wheeler, a longtime paid commentator for the news network. The suit was obtained exclusively by NPR. Wheeler alleges Fox News and the Trump supporter intended to deflect public attention from growing concern about the administration's ties to the Russian government. His suit charges that a Fox News reporter created quotations out of thin air and attributed them to him to propel her story. Fox's president of news, Jay Wallace, told NPR on Monday that there was no concrete evidence that Wheeler was misquoted by the reporter, Malia Zimmerman. The news executive did not address a question about the story's allegedly partisan origins. Fox News declined to allow Zimmerman to comment for this story. The story, which first aired in May, was retracted by Fox News a week later. Fox News has to date taken no action in response to what it says was a failure to adhere to the network's standards. Remember, of course, lots of people fired from CNN for various reasons, but nobody fired for the Seth Rich story over at Fox. The lawsuit focuses particular attention on the role of the Trump supporter, Ed Butowski, it's almost like a joke, in weaving the story. He is a wealthy Dallas investor and unpaid Fox commentator on financial matters who has emerged. By the way, would you take the advice of an unpaid commentator on financial matters who speaks on a national news network? You can't get paid for that? What do you know about finance? Anyway, this guy emerged as a reliable, it says here, anyway, Republican surrogate in recent years. Butowski offered to pay for Wheeler to investigate the death of the DNC aide, Seth Rich, on behalf of his grieving parents in Omaha, Nebraska. On April 20th, a month before the story ran, Butowski and Wheeler, the investor and the investigator, met at the White House with then Press Secretary Sean Spicer to brief him on what they were uncovering. Wow. The first page of the lawsuit quotes a voicemail and text from Butowski, boasting that President Trump himself has reviewed the draft of the Fox News story. He's reviewing everything, boy. Just shortly before it went on the air and was published. Spicer now tells NPR that he took the meeting as a favor to Butowski. Everybody's doing favors with the meetings. A reliable Republican voice. Spicer, because we have to see the email on that, Sean. Spicer says he was unaware of any contact involving the president. Butowski now tells NPR that he was kidding about Trump's involvement. Everything's a big joke. Rod Wheeler, unfortunately, was used as a pawn by Ed Butowski, Fox News, and the Trump administration to try and steer away the attention that was being given about the Russian hacking of the DNC emails, said Douglas Wigder, Wheeler's lawyer. So more backstory here. We'll see what we can cram in before we run out of time. On May 16th, the Fox News Channel broke what it called a bombshell story about an unsolved murder case, the fatal July 2016 shooting of 27-year-old Democratic Party staffer Seth Rich. Unfounded conspiracy theories involving Rich abounded in the months after his death, in part because WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange cryptically suggested that his death may have been related to the leaks of tens of thousands of emails from the Democratic Party officials and their allies at the peak of the presidential campaign. Fox News' story, which took flight online and ran in segments across major shows, breathed fresh life into the rumors. Fox reported that the leaks came from inside the party and not from hackers linked to Russia. Despite the conclusions of the nation's most senior intelligence officials, the network suggested that Democrats might have been connected to Rich's death and that a cover-up had thwarted the official investigation. The network cited an unnamed FBI official, and the report relied heavily on Wheeler, a former police detective, hired months earlier on behalf of the Riches by Butowski. These developments took place during growing public concerns over a federal investigation into the Trump camp's possible collusion with the Russian government during the campaign. The allegations have since touched the president's son and son-in-law, his former campaign manager, his attorney general, and his first national security advisor, who resigned as a result. You all know that background. The question of Rich's death took on greater urgency for Butowski after Trump fired FBI Director James Comey in early May. Comey had been overseeing the Russia investigation. The story ran just a week later. Fox's report went sideways shortly after it was posted online and aired on Fox and Friends, Trump's favorite show. It was denounced by the Rich family, D.C. police, Democratic Party officials, and even privately by some journalists within the network. Within hours, Wheeler told other news outlets that Fox News had put words in his mouth. Interesting. We'll have to kind of stop it there. I'll pass this news story on to you. And by the way, I should also note for our record here that I have in pocket another story of another sort of, not fake news yet. Oh, maybe I don't have it in pocket. So note to self, put it in pocket. You may have heard in passing the story of the Republican proposal that there be investigations again into Hillary Clinton and her campaign, this time with respect to collusion alleged between the Clinton campaign and Ukraine, which is a story that comes pretty much directly from Putin as well. But that and some other allegations that were cooked up, and the Republican staffers responsible for putting together the language of the bill actually crowdsourced the accusations leveled in the, I guess, resolution from the pro-Trump Reddit threads, of course, once again populated by the alt-right trolls and weirdos populating that particular segment of the internet. They basically just said, give us your wildest fantasies and we'll memorialize them in an honest-to-God congressional resolution. It may not go anywhere, but I have a feeling that it just might. So just a new angle on the fake news story, the overarching narrative of fake news. Anyway, for the rest of the stories of the day that we didn't quite get a chance to get to, we will, of course, hand things over to the guys bringing you the after show right after this. What have they got for you today? The NFL ends its concussion research partnership with the National Institutes of Health. $16 million short of its $30 million commitment. An Arizona power company is being investigated by the FBI for trying to block rooftop solar. And Texas, oh my goodness, I lost the thread there. Texas is trying to buy its way out of the absurdly high infant mortality rate they caused.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Much more on the after show today, too, with Chris Reeves for a discussion on the Trump administration's attacks on healthcare and decency, the continuing saga of Chris Kobach, Confidence Man, and is it really smart politics for Democrats to fund anti-choice candidates in the era of Trump? We'll have to discuss that later in the week. See you then.